and we try and go through it, and as we're weaving through it, the sun touches the horizon for the first moment. The first time in the whole trip it's got that low, and it doesn't quite set, but it just stays there like a perpetual sunset, threatening to set and never disappearing.
Wow.
And it turned the whole world, like every inch of ice, orange. Right up to the edge of our kayaks was glowing like there was a light bulb in each one.
You're listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast. We talk with adventurers from around the globe to bring you the inspiration and motivation you need to get started in the outdoors or to keep you moving if you're already there. Now here's your host, Kurt Linville.
Episode 1122, this is Mark Agnew, and he was on the team, which was the first to sea kayak the Northwest Passage in a single season. He does such a fantastic job of bringing this to life for us, and he also has amazing advice about adventure sports, about setting goals and achieving goals, and doing really hard things. But before we dive in here, I owe you an explanation. This episode is coming out on a Tuesday when it normally would have come out on a Monday. The reason is another one of my sons got engaged, and it's crazy because the family was in different places. Some of us were in Canada, and he was here in Colorado, and he got engaged, and so this weekend, his fiance's family and the rest of our family all converged here in the valley. The whole bunch of us hiked up through the rain to about 9,500 feet on the edge of the West Elks Wilderness area to the spot, the special location, where Daniel had proposed to Macy the prior week, and we all celebrated with them their upcoming marriage and their engagement season. We had a picnic lunch in the rain. The aspen were golden, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And the clouds were dancing on the peaks, and the sun was playing tag with the clouds. It was such a beautiful day of family celebration, but that meant I didn't get the podcast done. But I think it was worth it. Thank you for your understanding. And this episode is going to be so great. Mark Agnew on sea kayaking the Northwest Passage. Hi, friends. Welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast again. Today, I have Mark Agnew with us, and I am really looking forward to this interview. This is about sea kayaking the Northwest Passage. No small feat, an amazing place on this planet, and I think very, very few people have ever even visited. Matter of fact, Mark and his team set world records doing this because it was something that just had not been done this way before. Mark is a British adventurer and a journalist, and he etched his name in history as a part of the Arctic Cowboys. This was the team that did the Northwest Passage. 1,700 miles in a single season, and human-powered. Of course, they had all the waves, the weather, the polar bears, the ice packs, all of these things to contend with, and it took him 103 days. It set 2 world records, and Mark was awarded the Adventurer of the Year award. That's pretty cool, Mark.
Yeah, well, it's less cool when you find out I used my wife's email to nominate myself. But yeah, it was European Adventure of the Year, so my American teammates weren't eligible, but they certainly were as important more important to the success than I was, and worthy of that award. So always keen to point out that they were very much part of that award, even if they didn't get it.
Well, I was kind of curious how you managed to be the one on the list that got the award.
Yeah,
now
well, European.
You have to be British.
yeah, exactly. So I had that advantage in my corner. I was the Arctic Cowboys. 2 were from Texas, West and Jeff. West was the leader of the expedition, and they'd already been the first people to kayak the length of the Amazon, first people to kayak the length of the Volga. Wow. And then Eileen and I came in sort of at the last minute. And Eileen is from Alaska, lives in upstate New York, and is a serious kayaker, having won things like the Yukon 500 and whatnot. And then there was me, who had very little kayaking experience, had never met them before I flew to the Arctic. It all happened very quickly at the last minute.
Oh, wow.
So I owe them a great deal in terms of the risk they took inviting me. And it was a risk on my part too. And for me, it paid off. You have to ask them whether or not they regret asking me to join.
Well, here's a big question. You met them when you got there to start the trip. That's what you just said. Is that true?
Yeah, so I was trying to be the first person to row it. I mean, for the Northwest Passage is through the Canadian archipelago, and it links the Atlantic to the Pacific. And explorers have been looking for it for centuries. First person to go was sort of sent by Henry VIII. Then Martin Frobisher is sent by Elizabeth I. And when he meets the Inuit, that's their Canadian Thanksgiving. And then it really supercharges in the 19th century, where the British were obsessed with finding a shortcut to Asia. And then in the last 10, 15 years, as the ice disappeared, people wondered, is it possible by human power? Human power could mean kayaking, rowing, different things. And my so far up to that point, I'd been trying to row the Atlantic. So the natural progression for me was trying to row the Northwest Passage. And I joined a team, fellow Scots and Brits, a few people from elsewhere, but the core of the team were from the UK. And that went south in spectacular fashion over money, quite close to the start line. Delayed and postponed, and people were wondering, like, why are we postponing again? Where's the cash? People sharing the details of how much they've each given, and it's adding up to hundreds of thousands of pounds. And I was one of the most vocal in the sort of questioning of the direction. And when you're the head of the mutiny, you get hung. So it turned very, it really turned on me. And I talk about this in the book. So for the sort of only beginning to get comfortable talking about it now, because it really was probably the worst few days of my life when I was just all that money and the time and the energy and the emotion going into years of trying to get that expedition to the start line, and then to have it fall apart. But also to be blamed for it. My questioning was framed as like, the reason we can't go is because Mark's been here being negative the whole time. And I was so I knew there was a rival team of kayakers, and they tried the year before in single kayaks, and they hadn't got very far, and they thought they could solve some of their problems coming back in doubles, which meant they needed an extra person. And I messaged them, hey guys, we've sort of interacted on Facebook as like friendly rivals. Like, good luck, I hope you come second. But this thing's really going tits up for me, and I would appreciate the chance to come. So we had a couple of calls. I did a couple of kayaking sessions in a place called Cornwall with like a hardcore polar guy to test that I was safe. Then I flew to the Arctic, and this sounds like I'm tooting my own horn. I'm just trying to give an example of how ridiculous it was. The expedition has been ranked like top 10 greatest kayaking expeditions of the century. And I had two long weekend training in Cornwall and then flew to the Arctic. So it was really maybe stupid, foolhardy, opportunity doesn't come twice. Phrase it if you want as motivational or imbecile. But one way or another, I ended up there.
This wasn't your first time doing open water, human-powered boating, right? You had the experience. You had attempted to cross. Excuse me. You had attempted to cross the Atlantic 2 times before.
And if my success there was any indication how the Northwest Passage would go, then terribly. I tried to row the Atlantic.
These are not small feats.
Most people who row the Mid-Atlantic from Canary Islands to the Caribbean succeed. One way or another, they get across. And around about the time that I was rescued for the second time, the first time took 2 days, the second time took 3 days, somebody else floated across in a barrel, which was real like salt in the wound. And the first time I sort of bounced back quickly. Similar sort of, I guess, funding model to my failed Northwest Passage rowing. It was like, there's a captain, he advertises for spots, you buy a place on his boat. A paper place, they call it, sort of like a guide. We're all novices, and it's much more comforting and cheaper and easier to organize when you're just outsourcing it all. That's not quite the same with the Northwest Passage, because in the Northwest Passage, although it was similar, everybody on board had experience one way or another. But that first Atlantic attempt was with a guy who the press had already called Captain Calamity, and it went predictably. And the boat was about as seaworthy as a paper mache bath. And night 2, the people are sleeping in like 3 or 4 inches of water. We get helicoptered off, and I guess because it was, there's a number of reasons why I just like duck off the water off the duck's back. Let's go again. It was there was no ambiguity. We got off. We had to get off. It was my first failure, so that happens. But the second one was like, my teammate had to get off very early because she was not adjusting to it well. And, that's her story to tell. And then I was faced with the decision of whether to go on solo or not. and we're having problems with our battery that weren't charging, which meant that we're having to turn off vital safety equipment at night, particularly something called AIS that makes us visible to boats. And if there's two of us and there's one person rowing or at night, we're taking it in turns, 2 hours on, 2 hours off. If we do see a ship, you can turn it on. We had enough power to turn it on for a bit. But if I was by myself, I'd have to turn it off, and then I'd be invisible, and a ship wouldn't know they'd hit me. Or was I grabbing at a face-saving excuse because I was getting overwhelmed by the idea of throwing the Atlantic solo? And when I got off, the ambiguity of the decision, like when I describe it the first way with like, I'd be invisible to ships, it's like obvious that I should get off. It would be reckless to go on, but I might have been hamming that up, and I probably would have been fine. and like the reality is, it probably, I'm more experienced now, it would have been fine. And if like in a few days further south, it was probably just something to do with the fact that in the beginning you're relatively far north and the solar panels aren't as effective as they will be. So that ate at me for a long time, and really sent me into an existential crisis about who I was, why I was doing this, what's the point. The next 40 years of working in an office sounds dreadful, and the alternative is now being taken from me because it turns out I'm not really as resilient as I thought I was. Those are my first two failings. And that second one, eventually after a year or so, started to sort of redefine or remember perhaps better like what it was, what adventure actually is, and what it meant to me and why I was doing it. And COVID hit at the same time, and I was living in Hong Kong where we had basically no restrictions internally. It was just about being unable to travel outside. So I started kayaking a lot and just having a good pressure-free adventures. There was no records on the line or whatever. You're just doing it for the joy of it. And all of those things sort of coalesced for me going forward to the Northwest Passage. So yes, I had some experience. And by the time I got to the Northwest Passage, I had a lot of experience, 5-day, 10-day, 2-week adventures, but nothing to hang my hat on, The irony is now, after the Northwest Passage, I have kids. I basically do nothing adventure-y, haven't for a couple of years, but I'm probably perceived as an adventurer now. Oh, you finally become an adventurer because you've done this big thing. I think before you were not an adventurer because you only lasted 2 or 3 days. But the irony was in the 2 or 3 years leading up, I was adventuring every week, multiple times a week, 2 or 3 day trips, 5-day trips. I was having an adventurous life rather than an adventure of a lifetime. So now I'm like, I am an adventurer now, and I've done nothing for 2 years. I haven't done a hike or anything.
That's a season.
Yeah,
it's only a season, Mark.
Yeah.
The best part of my adventuring actually came when my kids got old enough to do it with me, and I had that wonderful experience of taking my kids out to do things. Before,
I'm not complaining. I'm only just pointing out the irony of the perception about what is an adventure and what is an adventurer. Yeah, I mean, I used to have an existential crisis about doing interesting things to feel fulfilled, and anything else was sort of just a waste of time. But now, even when I do nothing, if it's with the kids, I feel fulfilled. So I look forward to then doing something with the kids, like hiking when they're 5 or 10, and that's going to be a whole new world.
Well, I do want to get into the details of the journey through the Northwest Passage because it's just so fascinating to me. But since we're on the topic, your why changed.
Yes.
And I talk to a lot of adventurers, obviously, and I like to ask, well, why do you do this, or why did you do this? And I think in the beginning, a lot of people are doing it, and I don't want to pin the tail on the donkey, so to speak, but it seems like a lot of people are trying to put a feather in their cap.
Yes. Well, that happened.
Then after a while, they realize, no, it's not about that anymore. It's about something much deeper inside. So what about you, Mark?
Well, I think the second I thought about it was not to do with feather in the cap, because I didn't know that in adventure, people try to set world records. And so the Northwest Passage is world firsts, not records. I don't care about the difference, but my teammates are very bothered. I thought that world records are for 100-meter sprinters in the Olympics, not people trying to row across the Atlantic. My friend sent me a video saying, people row across the Atlantic, let's do it together. And I was excited to do something interesting and exciting and different and challenging. And then the guy who's selling spots on his boat, advertising world record attempt, need a crew. And then I was like, well, I'm a part of a world record attempt now. And that's when it became binary and world record focused. And then the second attempt was me and a woman were trying to be the fastest male-female pair, so it was still a record. I And I sort of lost sight of what I was originally trying to do. But I guess I didn't really know I wouldn't have been able to say why before that, because I didn't have the language. I would have said, oh, just, why not? Like, or I would have said something pithy, like if you have to ask why, you'll never know. And so, but then on my journey to recovery from my second failure, I reached out to a bunch of psychologists because I knew I wanted to write a book about the Northwest Passage, and there's an element of it which is about how to become resilient. And I wasn't as resilient as I thought I was, so these psychologists are going to help me. And I thought that it was going to be sort of a box ticking. I already knew the answer. You've got to get tougher, and these are the ways you get tougher. But the first person I spoke to didn't say, get tougher by doing X, Y, and Z. They said, well, what do you really want? And they directed me at a framework where sports people do sport for one of three reasons: performance, discovery, or relationships. Performance is win or loss. Discovery can be a variety of experiences, or relationships can be, the relationships that the experiences facilitate. And it was like a light bulb, because I knew that deep down, but I'd never been given the language. So I thought, I don't care about performance. World record. I'm not like I'm not a rower. I'm not especially fit. Like,
right.
Even I'm obsessed with something which frankly seems really unrealistic to even want. But I always wanted to be immersed in nature. I wouldn't want to do 3,000 miles on a rowing machine. I want to be in the wild. And relationships, it's about camaraderie. People often say, you've had trouble with your teams, why don't you go by yourself? No, I want to get to the end, win, loss, or draw, have a pint of beer and say, we did something special together. And the performance element is still important to me. Then I went on to the Northwest Passage, where there was a very binary, trying to be the first people to do a specific thing, and it was also a race. There was a rowing team coming the same direction as us and the other way. But that's still important to me, but it facilitates the other two. Like, relationships can mean a variety of things, and friendships are when good times are shared, but camaraderie is when tough times are shared, where you're pushing for that shared goal. So I still wanted the goal to facilitate the other things, but I guess it was a means to an end rather than the end in itself. And sometimes I get asked, well, did you train less hard? And because you're now, it doesn't matter if you succeed or not. But like, the quickest way to undermine camaraderie is if you're not up to the challenge. You have to want it even more, because you want it for the person next to you, not for like the one extrinsic arbitrary outcome 1,000 miles away, the headline, the European Adventure of the Award, like for you, for Eileen, for West, for Jeff. So, in a way, you find a deeper thing. And that, I'm now like a corporate motivational speaker. And that's what I say. I say, let go of the outcomes. You all are rewarding the person who sells the most, the person who hits the highest target. But like, define what the pursuit is. For me, it was immersion in nature and camaraderie. And then fall in love with it. And then the outcome will look after itself. I went day after day after day, not because it drew me closer to the end, because it drew me closer to my teammates, and then it drew me closer to the end as a byproduct. So I had this sort of like spiritual awakening of these intrinsic motivations, and it made the Northwest Passage enjoyable because everything became framed through that lens. Like, the headline of my book is "There Will Be Headwinds," because the moment headwinds come, previously that would be a annoying obstacle between me and what I want. But now, well, A, I want to be immersed in nature, and you're literally immersed in nature when there's a wind blowing in your face. And B, I want camaraderie, which is formed through tough times, not good times. So this is an opportunity to dig deep for each other. Suddenly the headwinds are facilitating exactly what I want. And I keep going and pushing myself harder. And then I get closer to the end, and if I was just like, bloody headwinds again, So my why became, I want to be immersed in nature, and I want camaraderie. And the way to facilitate that is to try and do something seriously hard in nature.
Yeah, I used to help coach mountain bike racing. And one of the things that I used to say was, there's no uphill, there's no downhill. There's only mountain biking.
That's good. Yeah.
And because we're going to encounter everything. If you do anything long enough, you're going to encounter the good days, the bad days, all of those sorts of things. But I love what you're focusing on is that you're doing it together.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes people say, oh, why? Well, how did it come to this? And it's like, I think of it as a Venn diagram between two aspects of my life. My parents, my dad is a proper explorer. He mapped part of South America. He led expeditions to Greenland and the Himalayas and whatnot. And my mum was an adventurer in her own right. She in the 70s, went to Australia and then traveled back overland through Southeast Asia and the Middle East, which as a woman in her 20s is as dangerous as being on a knife edge ridge in the Himalayas like my dad. And we always very outdoorsy. Our childhood holidays were camping in the rain in Scotland, not like sunbathing in Spain. And then rugby was my great love. And I wish I'd had the language that I have now to realize why I liked rugby, because I thought it was because I was good and we were good, and I liked being a good player and a good team. And I look back now with my new lens and go, what I loved was, particularly at school, it was like, a special time in your life with special people or for a communal goal, and like the winning sort of facilitated that camaraderie. So this Venn diagram of like rugby, really committing sport. You got to put your head and throw it at people's knees as they run towards you for your teammates. Camaraderie. Outdoors, my parents just made that second nature to me. And then there's like that world record, world first chasing aspect where you're like got camaraderie and outdoors. These two things come together. So for me, it replaced rugby and facilitated like the thing I'd love to do.
Wow. You've done some thinking about this, and I appreciate your answer a lot. I think one of the main things about having adventure in one's life, whether you're an adventurer or you have an adventure-focused lifestyle or you just have adventure in your life, it will enhance your understanding of yourself and the world around you and the way we interact and encounter things. And I can tell that you've spent some time on that.
Yeah, I do. Well, I was just so devastated after that second failed row for so long, and it was just coloring my view in every single way. Like just normal drinks with friends, and in the morning I'd have real anxiety, like, God, did I speak too much about myself? Are my friends bored of me? And I think like I was just like, so much of my worth had become linked up in this like idea of becoming a world record holder that I felt worthless.
Right.
I couldn't even imagine my friends seeing worth in me. And I had to like do some soul searching about like, well, I said at the time, I want to do something again, but I don't even want to do anything. You know what I mean? I was like, I want that feeling back in my life where I'm like, right, I'm going to do anything to get to the start line of the Atlantic. But I was just like, I can't face like even doing it again. Ultra running and trail running helped a bit in Hong Kong, because it's a massive community there, like one of the biggest in the world. And so it's really accessible and you can do it. And being like 6'2", big rugby lad, like I'm not built for ultra running. So there was actually no hope of me like not winning, but like not even like setting a good time. When I did the 100K race that I've done, the winners do it in 10 hours. I did it in 23 and a half. Like you can just see so that's like, right, I'm here for there's like no way that I can lose my sight of why I'm here. Because it's like not to win. It'll set records. I might have my own arbitrary target, like sub 24 hours. But so that helped me like sort of enjoy it. And then in COVID, as I say, I started kayaking with my friend Rory. And, and Hong Kong is beautiful and wild, and very little of it is actually city. And we were just island hopping from these beautiful deserted island to beautiful deserted island for like 5 days at a time without reception. And I was just like completely reminded by like the joy of sort of adventure for adventure's sake. So I had to do some soul searching to sort of save my soul, and if I didn't, then I was sort of doomed to eventually be miserable. Even if I succeeded at the next thing, you either would have failed eventually, or that next thing would have been like destination addiction. I would have crossed the finish line of the Northwest Passage expecting some kind of lifetime of contentment and enlightenment, and just felt like, well, everything's the same. What did I expect? But now I'm like, well, I've got these intrinsic motivations. Like the pride will wane and the headlines will be taken up by somebody else who does something else next year. But I know that I've got that bond with my teammates, and I've got those special experiences of coming face to face with polar bears, which aren't, a headline or not. They're inside.
Yeah, memories are precious, man.
Yeah.
I would rather have a treasure trove full of memories than a treasure trove full of gold.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's just so precious. And another thing that I feel strongly about, I applaud people that go for the records, who work that hard and who accomplish the big thing. I absolutely say, well, good for you. That's fun. And that, But if you get a world record, let's say in running, these days it's going to stand for what, a year or two, maybe till the next Olympics. I mean,
A world first will
there's
stand forever. I'll just say that.
there's
Nobody can
always
be
going
world
to be a
first.
there's always going to be a faster gun, which is it's an old West gunslinger terminology. But if your reason is just to be the fastest person in the world at whatever your sport is, then fantastic. But if that's the only reason, someone's going to beat you. You're not going to stay there long. But I think it becomes more about the climb than the summit. It becomes more about the friends than it does about the trophies. And if we don't learn that, then maybe we're missing out on something there.
I do like the element of challenging yourself, which is sort of inherent in having an outcome. So striving for the outcome is about the striving, not the outcome.
Well, hey, let's dive into
let me tell you about the outcome.
Of the trip. I really appreciate your perspective on all of that, and I think it's very valuable.
I could talk about it for 1,000 years. So yes, let's talk about the Northwest Passage.
But we've got to hear about the Northwest Passage. First of all, it's way up there. This is really far north, and you're dealing with ice and polar bears and Arctic tundra. That sort of setting. The weather window is short. About how long do you have to make this passage before it gets iced out again?
Well, this is maybe the reason that we succeeded. Realistically, you have, let's say, 60 days. Beginning of July to end of August. And of course, if you're close to the end, you can claw out days of September. But there seemed to be sort of a meme there. People would say, winter comes quickly here, winter comes quickly. And almost everybody who's tried it so far would get to about halfway where there's a town called Cambridge Bay after 60 days. And now they're faced with it's the end of August. Am I going to risk taking another 60 days and being in the middle of nowhere? Or do I go out now? Because there's not really another option after that.
I'm still alive right now. That's what I thought.
And we arrived in Cambridge Bay. It had been 60 days. And we just kept going and took 103 and finished in the middle of October. And there was at one point in a very shallow cove that had been protected by a spit, I saw the sea freezing over again. But in general, it was not threatening to freeze over again. But it was brutally cold. And some of the problems we encountered were things I wouldn't have necessarily anticipated, like all the fresh water freezing. So now what do we drink?
Right.
And Eileen and I walked for hours at one day just trying to look for water. That was as hard as any day kayaking. But that came in the matter of the last days, last week. And, it's not like a huge leap to imagine it coming 5 days earlier, 10 days earlier. And if it had, then we would have been in real trouble trying to finish it. And the other aspect that made this possible is everybody else starts from the western end, which is also way further south. So there is no ice in the water, and you can very reliably start at the end of June, beginning of July. And then we started in the eastern end, which is up north. So there was a lot of ice in the water. It was very front-loaded with risk. But by the time we got to halfway at 60 days, we were further south. We'd done all of the major crossings bar a couple. There were a couple of towns that we would maybe be 100-mile detour if we were running out of food or whatever. And we were doing a bit that at least a number of adventurers had done before. So we were no longer in the unknown, which meant that we could go on into winter. We were crossing paths at Cambridge Bay with the guy we were racing in the rowing boat who's going the other way. And he's facing the same decision as us, going to go.
But he's headed north.
He's heading north, and it's just crossing after crossing, a particular one called 50-mile wide crossing.
Oh, wow.
And going to be much bigger fetch for wind and waves and stuff like that. So, that's, but we might not have even got to Cambridge Bay because of all of the ice that we had to encounter at the beginning. I mean, we launched, we got repelled. It took 14 hours to get back to where we started. And then we sat there for 15 days. So that was what the ice conditions were like for us. So we lost 15 days out of our supposed 60 straight off the bat. And then encountered similar things for at least 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks after that. We front loaded it and we were the first people to try in that direction, except for the other rowing. There were two other rowing teams, one going the other direction and one going the same direction as us. But they started much later than us because rowing boats are quicker. And also they had a somewhat crazed plan to outboard motor the boat from Scotland. So they got there late. That was the team I fell out with.
Man, that's
So
something else.
so yeah, that's like the weather window and how we sort of approached it, and
And it worked, but
it
no
worked.
guarantees that it would have.
Yeah, I mean, it worked, but like the weather was getting worse and worse and worse, and we were set up for the last crossing, 40 miles across Franklin Bay, and then on the other side, it's just attached to the piece of land where the Northwest Passage ends, and it just front after front was rolling through, and that was like the morale at its lowest point. We were supposed to have a weather window on, I can't remember the days, but let's say it's Tuesday. We wake up at 3 a.m. It's in the dark. The waves sound bigger than we expect. We know there's another weather window on Thursday. We kept on saying to each other, don't screw the pooch. Don't screw the pooch. Don't get summit fever and take a risk. We'll let's just lie in, wake up on Thursday, let's not do anything rash. We woke up and the weather window had come. Sometimes waves sound worse than they are in the dark, or we were camped too close to shore. So from the inside of our tent, they sounded worse. We should have taken that Tuesday. Weather just changes, and they say no weather window for 10 days. And we've got very limited food. We can maybe make it stretch to 10 days. But then, what if we get stuck on the other side again for another 5 days or whatever? So that was like everybody snapping at each other all day. And we're contemplating a night crossing, which had been brutal and cold. And we've done nights before, but never a 40-mile night crossing. Starting looking at like going around the long way instead of the crossing and how many days that would take. But what if we end up like getting stuck and now we've got 10 days of no weather and we're even further away. So all of these moments coming together. And then it seemed like if a big system came through, it changed the outlook. Often we'd have like a big storm. It would say 10 days of bad weather, then a huge storm would come, and that would just change, like have some kind of not dominoes effect. And they'd say, right, well, now there's actually a weather window on Saturday. And I was just holding on that would happen again. And that Wednesday and that Thursday were like huge waves crashing off cliffs, spraying 30 meters in the air. And then woke up and Friday was doable. So we like dashed across and so, but what if that Friday hadn't been doable? And it was always just desperately praying for weather in those final few weeks. So yes, we maybe got lucky. Maybe, we make our own luck. Who knows?
So describe the kayaks. I know that you already said there were 2-person kayaks, and they're sea kayaks. But what kind of seas could they manage safely, do you think?
Probably very, very choppy seas. The limiting factor was, I suspect, not the kayak. It was probably me. They were, my teammates wondering, well, let's not get to the edge of this novice kayaker's expertise. So often we'd spend days on shore waiting for weather or conditions that maybe Wes, Jeff, and Eileen would have gone out in with a kayaker more experienced than me. But yeah, so they were super stable, 23 foot long, wide, and to begin with, very heavy and with a lot of stuff on deck. And but they got lighter and lighter, and we got faster, and as my kayaking improved, faster as well. So big kayaks. I mean, the hardest thing was landing and launching. If you're landing on in a single kayak, you sort of charge the shore, skid up onto the thing, and then jump out and pull your kayak up before the next wave comes.
Right.
But ours was so long, we'd skid up on shore. I was in the front. I'd jump out, and Eileen's still like 2 meters into the water. Can't jump out, and the waves are beginning to pick it up and swing it sideways. And they're really heavy with food and water. So that was the most challenging part of the day, I suppose.
Wow. What an incredible trip. So what was the scenery like? You said you wanted to be immersed in nature. So
well, it's hugely varied. So the first island, Bylot Island, huge grand cliffs, like straight out of the sea, black cliffs that would just go vertically into the air with these, with a huge amount of ice in the water, and the ice would just create an entire ecosystem. When the ice is there, the fish feed on the plankton, the seals feed on the fish, there's the whales. So bowhead whales, which are enormous, just like blowing their holes in the area, just you can hear them like, and seals bounding through the water in groups of 20. I've seen lots of seals before in Scotland, but never acting like a pod animal. Polar bears gandering across the ice, sort of framed by these cliffs behind, looking like like a cliche painting. And birds, these bird sanctuaries with hundreds of thousands of birds that we could hear before we could see. There's so many beating their wings. It was like you could hear the wind without any But you're like, what? Why can I hear the wind and nothing's blowing on my skin?
Right.
It's like sort of like a disconnect of senses, and then you get closer and you realize it was a million birds. And then we do a 13-mile crossing, and it's just different. The world's different because you're suddenly on a different island, and it sort of looks like is it Monument National Park in Utah with the big cliffs with the sediment piles at the bottom, and then you cross again, and we're on. I forget, it was Bouvier Peninsula and something above it, and that seemed more, there were still cliffs, but it seemed like rolling hills that reminded me of Scotland. And then we get into the middle, and it's grim. This is where Franklin and the Erebus and the Terror, who are the most famous people who went up there in the 1840s, they all disappeared and ate each other. It's just grim. Like everything, the shoreline is so low that you can't even see it, like until you're like within a mile of it. So navigation was hard, and collecting water was out of puddles rather than like fresh glacier water. And I did think to myself, this is where they must have died, and this is such a grim place to die. And then about a year after we finished, they found the skull of the Erebus captain, maybe a mile away from one of our campsites, or maybe 3 miles away from one of our campsites. So it really was where they died.
Wow.
And then Victoria Island is like these beaches covered in antlers, and with like a low rise turning into a bluff behind. And then the final section was like these sort of look like Japanese stone gardens, these like perfectly layered, like rice terrace layers of stones up a very steep cliff. And then the final peninsula with this incredibly intricate rock, like arches and beaches and little coves. And then the final bit was these big bluffs that come straight out of the sea, and they're like billowing with this sulfur-smelling smoke. They're called the Smoky Hills because there's some kind of shale that's been reacting under there for centuries.
Oh, okay.
And that was the final 20 miles or something. So hugely varied. After we crossed halfway, the day before or 2 days before we got to Cambridge Bay, we saw our last polar bear, and then that sort of denoted the end of the wildlife. And then in the second half, I suspect it wasn't geography as opposed to time that had changed. There now wasn't ice in the water, and I don't know where everything had gone, but there was nothing. Like I think we saw like the head of a walrus twice in the next 45 days.
That's wild. So how many days did it take before you fell into that kind of expedition rhythm where you feel like you understand nature and you're one with it, and everyone knows their job, and you know what the next day is going to be like? You know what I'm talking about.
A long time. So the first half was so stop-start with ice, try 15 days, nothing, and then the next few days are like action, then 3 days of nothing, and then 1 day of something. And so it was difficult to like find a rhythm. And then it was like 3 or 4 weeks in, we got a run of good weather 10 days in a row, which is like 7 days more than we'd managed at any other point. And we were running out of food and time at that point, so we like chew up the miles. That's where we began to settle into it. But what I wanted from very early on was more like structure, getting up and going on the tides or on like a uniform time. That didn't really happen until the second half, when we started having night, and then it imposed a structure on us. And we knew we could only kayak between these two times. And we did kayak at night a couple of times when we were trying to get to a specific point before a storm came, like a cabin. Our crew team would say, hey, there's a cabin 50 miles ahead of you. If you could go overnight tomorrow, then you might be able to make it. So, but generally it would be like up at 4 on the water, like 8 or 9, and then like 9 hours of kayaking, and off the water at 5, which was supposed to be 10 hours of kayaking. But such as the lethargic get ready times, never really worked out like that. Yeah.
It always takes longer than we think.
Yeah. So that's where the structure came in.
Well, without compromising any trust, will you describe your teammates? Who is the natural leader? Who kept people cheered up? Who was the one who, everyone finds a role.
Well, West was the leader. Wes was the leader, so we'd all have input, and he'd draw on different expertise. But if he balanced everybody's opinion and made a decision, that's the decision we're going with. He was good at listening to everybody, and over time, realizing what we all have. I think my thing that I brought to the team was navigation in particular, like. These guys, as I say, Amazon, Volga, amazing kayakers, but those are rivers, and I'm an ocean guy, and I think I could have did save us a lot more time by using effective GPS use, and that sort of ended up being deferred to me eventually. So Wes would make the decisions, listen to everybody, Jeff was like the comic relief. He's just one of the funniest, chilled out guys you'll ever meet. And
You got to have one of those.
and they're in their 60s, 61 and 63 they were, Jeff and West, and and Jeff has he's like, there's a lifetime of stories, and some of them with his Texan accents sound like you're like an old-timey gold prospector, like ain't no jobs around here, but everybody worked for the railroad, and you're like, what? And he's just so relaxed, he popped his head out of the tent and he's like, oh, hey guys, there's a polar bear here. Go and get. He comes back in and we're like, and he's like, oh, it's gone. He's just so chill. And Eileen is just like an Energizer bunny. She's like that battery with the bunny that never stops, and she's just always looking for something to do, and just like thanklessly doing like menial chores which are never going to get a headline but are crucial. And I was in a boat with Eileen, and which means you just share hours and hours of winding conversations about everything and nothing. And for me, I'm very close to Eileen, and I love her, and I'm just so grateful to have shared that experience with her. So I don't know how specific the roles were, and we were all agony aunts to each other at various points. Of course there were tensions, higher tensions between specific people rather than others, and as is always with a group. But Jeff and Wes are like best friends for 30 years. Eileen and I are new to each other and new to everybody else, so there's always going to be different dynamics.
Right.
But these are inevitable. I love them all.
Can you tell us a moment that stands out as that magic moment that you had somewhere? Maybe there's several of them, but share an experience where you're like, wow, I didn't know that this would happen.
Yeah, we all agree on what moment that was, because at the end we were having a bowl of ice cream, like a well-lit lobby, and listening to music that we'd all spoken about and never listened to of the journey. And I was like lumps in my throat at this point, and we all agree on what one of the best days of our lives maybe. There's a 50-mile wide crossing called Prince Regent Inlet, which was sort of the crux of the expedition. We knew there was a bit of ice in the water, so we went further south to try and avoid it, which turned the 40-mile crossing into a 50-mile crossing, but hopefully without ice. And we launched, and first we come across narwhal, they swim all around us.
Oh, wow.
Unbelievable. And then to our horror, we come across an ice pack in the middle of the crossing, as far from shore as we will be at any point in the expedition. And we try and go through it, and as we're weaving through it, the sun touches the horizon for the first moment. The first time in the whole trip it's got that low, and it doesn't quite set, but it just stays there like a perpetual sunset, threatening to set and never disappearing.
Wow.
And it turned the whole world, like every inch of ice, orange. Right up to the edge of our kayaks was glowing like there was a light bulb in each one. And on the other side, the moon came up for the first time, and it was just sitting on the horizon, threatening to rise and never quite doing so, mirroring the sun on the horizon.
Wow.
And it just turned its side of the world purple. And the water between the ice that we were weaving through began to freeze very gently, little film across the surface of the water. So we were having to crunch and crunch and crunch. But that began to sparkle too, so everything was colourful. And then we exited the pack, the sun went up, the moon disappeared. And like, even at the time, we had to like say to each other, like, holy shit. And we pushed on, and we get within a few miles of shore, 10 hours. We're going to do it. We're going to, 1 or 2 hours from now, finish the crux of the expedition. It gets easier from here on out. And then like all of this ice just swept in from somewhere else. Like, we'd seen dynamic ice before. We've been trapped even by it, but not like this. This was flowing and crunching and spilling over itself like lava. And we were just so close to shore, but it took us another 7 hours. And we were weaving and dodging. And at one point, we're sitting in this space between these two big pieces of ice, thinking, what do we do? And then the two bits of ice just spontaneously start to close in on us like the trash compressor in Star Wars. And Jeff and Wes get out of the way, but Eileen and I aren't quick enough. And it just slams into us with this like violence that just took me aback, because they're just moving gently and benignly and quietly, and then it's like, wow, there's so much force in this. And I assumed we were going to be crushed to death if I had time to think of it at all. And instead it like lifted our kayak up and pushed us on top of the ice, and Eileen and I then slipped back into the water, but there's more ice coming in. So I jumped out of the boat, pulled Eileen and my kayak up with her still in the back, and West and Jeff had now been hit, and they're being rolled over and pushed up onto the ice. So West is in the front, so he's going to roll over onto the ice, but Jeff's in the back, still in the water. And as I say, Jeff's the most chilled out man you'll ever meet. And he's like, "Oh yeah, Mark, I'm going to need your help here real quick." So I like run over, pull the ice, the kayak forward, and we slip out onto the ice. And then it just sets around us like concrete. We wouldn't know we were even moving, but our GPS told us we're still going about 3 or 4 miles an hour, which is about the speed we can kayak.
Goodness.
And we just waited there for a long time. And I have no idea how long that was. You know, it could have been 10 minutes or 2 hours. It's just like one of those tricks of memory where I just feels like eternity, but I honestly have no idea. And we launched again when there was space in the water, and weaved and dodged through the ice, and eventually got to the front of this like train that was just steaming forward. Pulled out our kayaks one more time and pulled them over, and tried to land 100 meters away. And there's a bloody polar bear there with its 2 cubs.
No.
So we went for another hour and then found somewhere to land this beautiful, one of our favorite camp spots, this waterfall with these bridges of ice across it. And, that was 18 hours. At 10 hours, we thought it was going to be 11 hours, and it turned out to be another 7 or 8 of life and death struggles. So what have you got there? Like immersion in nature, tick, camaraderie, fighting for our lives, everything. And like we all would agree, like remember that day in Prince Regent Inlet, like what a day.
Wow. What a beautiful description of it as well. That's glorious. And I would assume that we can enjoy a lot of similar descriptions in your book. Name your book for us.
There Will Be Headwinds, Kayaking the Northwest Passage. Yes, that's a big chapter in the book, that one. I'll just ruin the ending for you. We'll make it, but it's in there.
Well, you're alive to tell the story.
Yeah.
So I think that people that are inexperienced with doing big things, they don't know, first of all, what they're capable of. They haven't discovered that yet. And I can already tell you, you're capable of far more than you know. But that said, there comes a point at times like what you just described where you have to dig deep, and it's like we've just got to keep going.
And that is learnt. I mean, I could never do that. It's like, yeah, you could also never lift 200 kilograms on a deadlift, but if you train, then you will start at 50 and add 2 kilograms next week and 2 kilograms the week afterwards, and in 2 years you'll be able to do it. People say, how long did it take you to train? And I'm like, well, I only really dedicated like 4 months out, like specifically, right? I am now training for the Northwest Passage. But for maybe 8+ years, this had just become part of my life. I was hiking sometimes after work. In Hong Kong, there's just so many mountains, like hiking mountains that are just on the way back from work if you want to, if you could commute with a hiker. And ultra marathons, and I row around Hong Kong Island, and I train for the Northwest, the Atlantic, doing 100K on a rowing machine or something, something that usually people would like make a Just Giving page for, and doing 100K. I'm just like doing that. And, and it's peaks and troughs while I don't know, busy at work or particularly motivated or gearing up for a specific challenge. But over the course of 8 years, it embeds in your body.
Right.
As somebody told me once, fitness takes weeks, endurance takes years. And in particular, in the wake of that, like, I need to become more resilient, I started doing stuff that was specifically stressful to build that response, because I got overwhelmed in uncertainty and I couldn't make a clear decision in the Atlantic. That's never going to happen to me again. So that could be, I wasn't I've never been as fit as I was building up to the first Atlantic attempt in a fitness metric sense. But building up to the Northwest Passage, a huge physical element, kayaking for miles or rowing for miles, but with the specific intention to get on the wrong side of an island where I'm by myself, and I knew that the seas would be mixed, so I'm staying calm and relying on myself and practicing that. Or even more specific, like I took a rowing boat out once and went from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. backwards and forwards over maybe a 3 or 4K strip. Dark, by myself, passing the boathouse every half an hour so I could get out if I wanted to. It's a time, not distance. So no matter how hard I push myself, the end doesn't get closer. And suddenly I'm 1 mile offshore in the Northwest Passage, and I have to push myself with no idea whether I'm going to finish in half an hour or 7 hours. So I'm like recreating all of those things. So people say, what did you learn about yourself? You never know what you're like in those situations until you're in that situation. And I said, I knew exactly what I was like, because it was only incrementally more chaotic than situations I'd put myself in. And I would have been utterly overwhelmed if I did it in 2018. And then if I'd done it in 2021, I would have been good. And then I did it in 2023, and I didn't just survive, I loved it. I was like, this is fun. This is why I'm here. I'm not like, I'm tough enough to get through this thing I want to give up on. I'm like, I would rather be nowhere else, because I got there like incrementally. So when you say, I don't think I'm capable of this, it's like, well, you can get there. And if you want to, it's just a matter of whether or not you want to. I mean, there's no reason you need to enjoy almost dying several times a week. Like, there's better things to do with your time. But like, I thought being tough was about not giving up when you wanted to. But now I think toughness and resilience are different. And for me, it's about enjoying times that are tough rather than being tough enough not to give up when it's miserable.
Right.
Yeah, type 2 fun.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is fun. Some people describe type 2 fun to me as something that you hate doing and enjoy in retrospect. And I'm like, it doesn't nail it for me, because I enjoy doing it. I'd rather,
I think that transitions, actually, because I experienced it early on when I started doing mountaineering. I experienced times when I thought, this is not fun anymore. Why am I here? But then 2 weeks later, I'm like, I can't believe I did that, and I want to go do it again. But then later, I would get to the same place where before I may have said, well, this is not fun anymore. Why am I here? So something gets shifted.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it turns into, no, this is really fun.
Yeah.
This is maybe more fun.
I did a 100-mile over 2 days cycle either last week or 2 weeks ago, and it was like the first thing I've done since the Northwest Passage at all. And certainly not like a headline. You say you've done mountain biking training, you're probably half the people, even the worst person you've ever coached, probably do it 3 times as quick as me. My back brake had just been, somebody put new pads in, and it was essentially 30% on. So I couldn't even go uphill. I just had to push. And then going downhill felt like I was going uphill. Like people were gliding past me, like freewheeling, and I was like grinding and grinding.
Yeah.
And towards the end of the day, maybe the last 3 or 4 hours, it was the most amount of pain I've ever been in from exercise, with the exception of actually being injured. And like compared to the Northwest Passage, there were days where I was like out of energy and like close to tears, but it wasn't like everything in me was burning. I would probably 5 years ago would have been tough enough to say I could push through this, but in 2025, I'm like, oh, it's good to be back. Like, here we are. This is what we're talking about, like, here we go. And like trying to sort of invent stories to like give it even more urgency. Like, well, I'm not like like I didn't have batteries in my light. Because I had no idea it would take me that long.
So you got to beat the darkness.
And I'm like, and I have to go on a road now because I actually can't do it on the trails. So we're like, I'm now on the road, backcountry road in England. They're small, and in 2 hours it's going to be dark, and I have kids, and I'm crossing the line to reckless risk of just like, I was like doing so much of it without hands because my shoulders were so sore. So I'm like, I've got to finish before it's dark, because otherwise I'm like being irresponsible. So like finding more reasons to like push rather than just being like, I'll get there when I get there. And afterwards, me and Rory were like, Rory's the same guy I was kayaking with in Hong Kong. He flew across and we did this together.
Oh, that's great.
And he's like, what was the best part? Was it the beautiful views on the summit or what? And I'm like, the last 3 hours when we were grinding. And Rory was probably having the worst time because he would go like 10 minutes ahead of me every 5 minutes and have to wait. But I'm like, just good to be back. You know what I mean? And like, so it's like that transition. And, I was talking before about the performance discovery relationships. I feel like I've now distilled it into this like intrinsic motivations. There's only 4: challenge, experience, relationships, or cause, like as in a meaningful cause. Right. I'm doing this for charity. Experience and relationships have been over, but challenge is it's like performance, but it's got a nuance to it because it's not necessarily outcome based, and I feel like that one was ticking my challenge intrinsic motivation. So I think we're on the same page when we say, sooner or later you learn to love it. You don't just learn to love having done it.
Yes, exactly. When you first start doing difficult biking, it's a perfect example. All you can think about is being at the top of the hill when you're trying to get up the steep, long hill. But there comes a point in your biking where you're like, no, there is no hill, right? Like we talked about before. There's only biking, and this is part of the fun.
Well, with the brake on, there was no downhill.
We're really, I guess, out of time. I thoroughly enjoyed this so much, Mark. It's been a real honor to hear about your experience and for you to share so candidly with us. I appreciate it, and I want to say thank you for that. Did you draw a life lesson that we could end with? Something that you would say, from the Northwest Passage in particular, this is one thing that I drew from that I think would be valuable for others?
If you define the pursuit, then it's easier to love. And if you love the pursuit, then the outcome will look after itself.
Okay, say it again.
If you define the pursuit, it's easier to love the pursuit. And if you love the pursuit, the outcome will look after itself. I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's the journey, not the destination. But journeys are defined by the destination. So it's almost impossible. Well, what does the journey mean? You're not on a, Sisyphus going perpetually pushing a rock up a hill. He's not on a journey because there's nowhere to go. So difficult to disentangle destinations and journeys. So you've got to define the journey. Is it a challenge? Is it an experience? Is it a relationship? Is it a cause? When you can say to yourself, I'm doing this because it's a challenge, then that makes the journey real, measurable, tangible. And you can say, well, now I'm achieving my goal because I defined the pursuit as the challenge. Or next week, I'm going cycling with my dad. He's 81. It will be a little bit challenging and it will be outdoors, but it's about relationships.
Yes.
And if my dad or I are not up for a 100-mile day and we do a 10-mile day, the point of the journey that time was relationships. And the outcome doesn't matter. So define the pursuit, and then you can love the pursuit, and then the goal looks after itself.
Ah, that's beautiful. Where can people find your book?
If you just Google There Will Be Headwinds, Kayaking the Northwest Passage, you'll find it on Amazon, certainly, and other websites that Google throws up at you.
All right, and how else might people contact you? Maybe they want you to speak to their group.
Well, adventureagnew.com is my website, and my full-time job now is to travel the world, talking to corporate audiences in particular. But if you're in London and you've got a kid, any state school, I'll do for free, or old folks' home as well. I'll do them for free if they're in a reasonable distance of my house. But if you want to hire me for your company to help them understand how to love the pursuit so the goal looks after themselves, then I'm your man.
All right. Mark Agnew, thank you so much for your time today. That was delightful. For all of you out there, choose the big goal, because that helps all the rest of these things to fall into place. But it's not necessarily about, getting to the top of the mountain, as Mark so clearly pointed out. It's about doing the thing, getting started, having a goal that's big enough to get you out there and trying and learning and experiencing life on a whole new level. So until the next show, do get out there and have some fun.